When I drove up that road, my father's valley was gone, replaced by rooftops. That's the first thing the camera should see. A long, slow shot of a dirt track I knew by heart, except the trees were thinner, the air smelled like cut lumber, and the silence wasn't the silence I grew up with. It was the silence of something being erased. I stepped out of my truck and felt the altitude hit my lungs. Willow Creek Valley always greeted me like this: thin air, resin from pine bark, the distant rumble of the creek rolling down from the ridge. But the valley itself? It was different. Flattened. Graded. Carved into parcels that shouldn't have existed. I stood there a moment, just listening. A diesel generator hummed behind the new security booth. A bright metal gate stretched across the old road, the one my father cleared by hand. And on the gate, in bold letters I'd never seen before: Willow Creek Mountain Estates, private property. A guard in a reflective vest leaned out of the booth window. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "You can tell me why there's a gate across my family's land." He squinted, then glanced at a clipboard. "Residents only. You'll need a permit for access." My father owned this entire valley, I told him. Since 1986. "Sir, I don't know anything about that." He tapped the clipboard again. "Your name's not listed." I almost laughed at that. Not listed. On my own land. "I'm not asking permission," I said. "I'm returning home." He stiffened at the tone. People usually do when someone speaks calmly at the exact moment they should be angry. Anger is expected. Calm isn't. Calm makes the other person question what they've stepped into. Before he could respond, a white Lexus rolled down the hill from inside the community. The driver's window slid open, and a woman with perfectly arranged blonde hair leaned out. Her sunglasses reflected the entire valley, but her expression reflected nothing at all. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. The guard brightened. "Miss Huxley, he says this is his property." Her head tilted, almost amused. "And you are?" "Michael Trent." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You must be mistaken. This land is part of Willow Creek Mountain Estates. If you don't have business here, you'll need to leave." I studied her face. Controlled. Composed. Confident in a way people get when they've stood on something long enough they start calling it theirs. "My father was John Trent," I said. "He surveyed and owned this entire valley floor." Her expression shifted, barely, but enough. A flicker of recognition. A flicker of concern. Then she smiled again. "Those records were superseded. Everything here is common area." Common area. The phrase hit me harder than her tone. It was a legal label, one that only appeared on plats with very specific, very deliberate language. "Show me the filings," I said. She laughed softly. "You don't demand records from us. You request them." "I didn't ask," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "Guard, close the gate." He pressed a button. The metal bars slid shut between us, locking with a heavy clang. I stepped back reflexively, and the camera in my mind caught that exact sound, echoing across the valley like a verdict delivered before the trial. Ms. Huxley gave me one final look. "You're trespassing, Mr. Trent. Don't come back without legal representation." She drove off. The gate buzzed. The guard retreated inside his booth. And I stood alone with the dust settling at my boots. I've been a land surveyor for 20 years. Property lines aren't abstract to me, they're living things. They tell stories. They carry the weight of decisions, conflicts, handshakes, promises. And the moment I looked at that gate, I felt something wrong under my feet. Wrong like a misdrawn boundary. Wrong like a forged signature. Wrong like someone trying to erase a lineage by redrawing a map. I drove into Durango and went straight to the county clerk's office. The floor was cold tile, and the smell of wet paper hit me the moment I stepped in. I asked for the most recent plats recorded for Willow Creek Valley. The clerk typed something into her system, then pointed me to the public terminals. "Here you go," she said. Subdivision filings from 2019. 3 years after my father died. 3 years after the valley should have remained untouched. I opened the digital copy, and the hairs on my arms lifted. The plat didn't match the original topography. Entire sections had been absorbed into Common Area A. Streams were rerouted on paper. Boundaries shifted. Almost like someone had rewritten the land to fit a new story. Then I saw it. A notary stamp from a woman named Linda Marcher. My throat tightened. Linda Marcher had died in 2016. I attended her memorial. I zoomed in on the seal. It looked clean. Too clean. The date on the stamp was 3 years after her death. The signature above her seal didn't match the way she looped her M. This wasn't a mistake. It was fabrication. My pulse didn't rise. Not yet. Shock doesn't rush. It sinks in slowly, layer by layer, like cold water filling a room. I printed the plat. The paper fed out warm, but the ink felt colder than the tile beneath my feet. I stepped outside the building and leaned against the brick wall. Cars passed. People talked. Life carried on like nothing had changed. But something had changed. I knew my father's handwriting. I knew his lines, his angles, his precision. He never approved this. He never reviewed it. He never signed away a single acre. Someone else had done that. Someone with access, motive, and the arrogance to believe no one would ever come back to check. I drove back to the valley and parked just outside the gate. The wind had picked up. Pine branches scraped against each other with a dry whisper. The sun dipped behind the ridge, turning the peaks into silhouettes. I stood there a while, watching the lights blink to life across the valley, porch lights, driveway lamps, security floods. Homes built on soil my father mapped with his own hands. A truck slowed as it passed. The driver rolled down his window. Middle-aged. Tired eyes. "You the guy they were arguing with earlier?" he asked. "That depends on who they is." "The HOA." He nodded toward the houses. I saw the email they blasted out. Said some outsider is trying to claim property that doesn't belong to him. I exhaled slowly. That's not the truth. He hesitated. Never thought it was. Just, be careful. They don't like being challenged. Who's they exactly? The man swallowed. Caroline Huxley runs everything up here. Rules, fines, approvals, all of it. I nodded. I appreciate the warning. He drove on. His taillights disappeared around the bend. The valley grew darker, but my mind sharpened. Every instinct in me, professional, personal, aligned into one clear direction. Someone had manipulated the land. Someone had rewritten what belonged to my father. Someone had expected no one would return to question it. But I was back. And I wasn't leaving. I walked up to the gate, ran my hand along the cold metal bar, and whispered the words that would become the foundation of everything that followed. That's when I decided to document everything. And I meant it. The first notice appeared 2 days later. A bright orange slip taped to my cabin door like a warning tag on condemned property. I found it before sunrise, the ink still fresh enough to bleed when I touched it. Unauthorized occupancy, fine, $250 per day. Report to HOA compliance immediately. I read it twice, then stepped inside and set it on the table. The cabin smelled like old cedar and dust, comforting in a way the new community would never understand. I poured coffee, sat down, and studied the notice again. The wording wasn't just aggressive, it was deliberate. It implied authority the HOA didn't have over me, or over the land. 30 minutes later, another knock. 3 people stood on my porch. 2 men, 1 woman. Clipboards in hand. Matching jackets. Manufactured confidence. The woman spoke first. "Mr. Trent?" "Yes." We're with Willow Creek Mountain Estates Compliance. She glanced at her clipboard. You've already been issued a warning. We need you to vacate within 24 hours. I took a slow breath. On what grounds? This structure is within regulated common area. You are occupying it without approval. This isn't common area, I said. This is private property. One of the men smirked. Not anymore. I opened the door wider so they could see the interior, dusty beams, my father's old drafting table against the back wall, the same stone fireplace he built himself. This cabin has stood here longer than your HOA. Longer than half the people in this valley. That's not relevant, she replied. You're subject to community bylaws. I'm not a member, I said. That's under review. The phrasing caught me. Under review by who? She looked over her shoulder, as if confirming no one else watched. By Mrs. Huxley. Of course. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Tell Mrs. Huxley she's welcome to bring whatever documents she thinks support her claim. But I'm not moving. Her voice stiffened. You are making this more difficult than it needs to be. I held her stare. Truth usually looks difficult to people who prefer shortcuts. The man with the smirk stepped forward. We'll be back. With enforcement. Bring paperwork, I said calmly. Not threats. They left with clipped footsteps, their jackets snapping in the morning wind. Their truck rolled halfway down the road before stopping. The brake lights glowed red for a long moment. Someone was filming me from inside. Then the engine growled and they disappeared. That was the beginning. By the end of the week, 4 more notices appeared. Encroachment. Unauthorized vehicle. Noise violation. Improper structure. None of it made sense. I hadn't even run the generator. I hadn't moved a stone. I hadn't made a sound outside of walking to the creek. These weren't violations. They were pressure tactics. Every night a different car idled near my driveway. Sometimes 2. Headlights off, engines humming just loud enough to remind me they were there. Once, around midnight, someone knocked hard twice, then sped away before I reached the door. On the 6th night, I found a yellow envelope on the hood of my truck. Inside was a letter from attorney Daniel Huxley, written on crisp stationery with a logo embossed at the top. Your refusal to comply with community rules constitutes implied acceptance of HOA jurisdiction. Legal action will follow if you do not vacate immediately. I sat on the steps of the cabin with the letter in my hands. The stars were bright enough to see the ridgeline, but the valley below felt different, like a stage where someone had rehearsed their intimidation long before I arrived. I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. A flashlight beam swung toward me. Evening, a strained voice said. It was the same man who warned me earlier, the one who had said, they don't like being challenged. He looked nervous. You should know, he whispered, Caroline's telling everyone you're planning to sue the whole community. People are scared. She's riling them up. I rubbed my thumb against the corner of the letter. I never said anything like that. I know. He glanced over his shoulder. But she's good at creating stories. And her husband handles the filings. I paused. Do you trust them? His breath hitched. I trust them to protect themselves. Not anyone else. He hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. You didn't get this from me. I opened it. A copy of an internal HOA email chain. At the bottom of one message was a line that tightened my chest. We cannot allow the previous boundary claims to be resurrected. If Trent pushes further, escalate enforcement. CH. I looked up. Thank you. He shook his head. I can't get involved. But, good luck. He slipped away into the dark. The next morning, I drove into town. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was turning through every detail. Notices. Threatening letters. Midnight surveillance. The forged plat. The dead notary. I pulled into the office of a property attorney named Elena Caldwell, a name I remembered from a quiet title seminar years back. Her reputation was sharp, smart, straightforward, allergic to anything resembling misconduct. She greeted me with a handshake and a direct look. "You sounded urgent on the phone. What happened?" I placed the forged plat on her desk first. Her expression didn't move, but her eyes changed. She traced the signature lines, then flipped to the notary page. "Is this who I think it is?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "She died years ago." "Yes." Elena leaned back. "Who recorded this?" "According to the clerk's log, Daniel Huxley." Her jaw tightened. "Of course." I handed her the notices, the letter, the email chain, and my father's original deed. She sifted through everything with the patience of someone assembling a puzzle only she knew how to solve. When she finished, she looked up with a calm, steady expression. "You're not wrong," she said. "They're pressuring you to leave so you won't challenge the plat." "I know. And they're doing it aggressively. Too aggressively." She tapped the forged page. "This is criminal, not civil." I waited. She held the documents for a moment longer, then set them down carefully. "You have grounds for a quiet title action under CRS 38-41-201, she said. "And likely for an injunction. If these filings are what they appear to be, the entire HOA structure in that valley rests on a false foundation." I exhaled slowly. "Can we prove it?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes. But they'll come after you harder once they know you're not backing down." "I'm aware." She nodded once. "Good. Then we do this the right way. No shortcuts. No shouting matches. Just documents, records, and facts." Her voice was steady, professional, but I heard something else beneath it. Recognition. She had seen this kind of power play before. "Michael," she said quietly, "they expect you to fold. Don't." I felt something settle inside me, cold, focused, unwavering. "I won't," I said. Elena closed the folder and stood. "Then let's start." Outside her office, the afternoon sun hit the windshield of my truck. I sat behind the wheel and let the moment settle. Fear wasn't gone, it never disappears entirely. But it had changed. It no longer pulled me back. It pushed me forward. The HOA believed they could corner me with fabricated violations, forged filings, and whispered accusations. They were wrong. And they were about to learn exactly how wrong. Because now I had a lawyer. I had records. I had proof. And for the first time since stepping back into the valley, I felt clarity. Everything that followed began here. The next few weeks moved quietly, almost deceptively. While the HOA tried to squeeze me with new notices and vague threats, Elena and I built something stronger, fact by fact, line by line, record by record. People think legal battles start in court. They don't. They start in silence, long before anyone steps inside a courtroom. Most mornings I drove into town before dawn. The county records office opened at 8, but I liked arriving early. The parking lot was still cold at that hour, frost clinging to the windshield edges, the mountain air sharp enough to wake every nerve. Inside, the record room hummed with fluorescent lights. Old metal cabinets lined the walls like sentinels of forgotten stories. I pulled surveys from as far back as 1912, mineral claims, ranch deeds, water rights filings. Everything connected to Willow Creek Valley, everything bearing my father's meticulous handwriting or his predecessors. Elena joined me on the third day. She placed a coffee on the table and sat across from me, her expression focused. "Find anything new?" she asked. I slid a folder toward her. "This plat from 1999. Look at the eastern boundary." She scanned it. "This matches your father's line work." "Exactly. No mention of subdivision. No shared access. Just private land." She nodded. "This will matter." Then she pulled out her own stack. And I found something too. She handed me a screenshot of an email obtained through a resident willing to cooperate anonymously. It read, "The consolidation plat is final. Keep residents aligned. Trent must be portrayed as a threat to community stability. D.H. Daniel Huxley." Their strategy was clearer with every document. Elena leaned back. This shows intent to influence residents before any legal issue existed. Manipulation, I said. Exactly. And in court, patterns matter. I watched her outline the case on a yellow notepad. Her handwriting was precise, almost architectural. Everything she wrote had a purpose: quiet title, injunction, notary verification, expert testimony. It was strategy without showmanship. Clean. Controlled. As she wrote, I felt something shift. Pressure became direction. Fear became focus. 3 days later, we drove to meet a retired surveyor named Harold Jensen, one of the two whose signature was forged on the 2019 plat. His home sat on a small hillside outside Bayfield, tucked between birch trees that creaked in the wind. Harold opened the door before we knocked. His hair was silver, his posture stiff from old injuries, but his eyes were sharp. "You're John Trent's boy," he said to me. "Yes." He nodded once. "All right. Come in." His living room smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder without being asked. "This is every signature I've ever used on recorded documents," he said. "If someone put my name on anything after I retired, I want it exposed." I placed the forged plat in front of him. Harold stared at it for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No. I didn't sign this. And the person who didn't even try to match my pen pressure." Elena asked, "Would you be willing to sign an affidavit?" He sighed. "If I don't, people like that keep getting away with it." He signed. It was a small victory, but it tightened the foundation beneath us. Fraud wasn't speculation anymore. It was confirmed. Back in the valley, the HOA sensed something shifting. The tone of their pressure changed. It grew more frantic. One afternoon, as I was marking old survey stakes along the creek, a black SUV rolled up and stopped beside me. The window lowered. Caroline Huxley sat behind the wheel. "Mr. Trent," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I rested my hands on my tools. "Go ahead. You're creating conflict." Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "You're scaring residents. I haven't spoken to anyone except the people who came to threaten me." Her jaw flexed. "You're making this personal." "It became personal when you built on my father's land." She exhaled sharply. "There's still a chance to resolve this peacefully." "How?" "You drop whatever you're planning. We'll offer a compensation package. Enough to walk away." I studied her expression. Not confidence, fear. Not authority, desperation. "No," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." I stepped closer to the window. "No. I stopped making mistakes the moment I stopped staying silent." She held my stare for a long, cold second. Then she drove off, leaving dust hanging in the air like a warning. Later that week, Elena and I prepared the quiet title filing. Her office was dim, lit by a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across stacks of evidence. "We need one more thing," she said. "Proof the recording of that plat violated CRS 38-35-101. What does that require?" She pulled up a statute on her laptop. "Any recorded plat must be submitted with proper verification from a licensed surveyor and an active notary. If either is forged, the entire document becomes invalid." I nodded. "And we already have evidence of both." "Elena," I said quietly, "what happens if we win?" Her eyes lifted. "The valley reverts to you. The HOA loses any claim. And every structure built on misrepresented land becomes subject to correction." "Meaning?" She didn't soften the answer. Meaning they'll have to negotiate with you, or remove them. I leaned back in the chair. Not out of shock. Out of realization. The valley wasn't just a place anymore. It was leverage. It was truth resurfacing. And if we lose? I asked. She shook her head. Michael, with what we have, losing isn't on the table. Her certainty steadied something inside me. Our first real break came from an unexpected source, the county clerk. A younger staff member called Elena at 7 a.m. We need to meet, she said. Off the record. We arrived before the doors opened. She led us into a back office and closed the blinds. I checked the submission logs again, she whispered. The 2019 plat wasn't recorded during business hours. Elena asked, who logged it? She swallowed. It was scanned in by someone using the clerk's master code. That code is only given to the clerk, her deputy, and external attorneys with special clearance. Daniel? I asked. The clerk nodded. I felt the weight of it. Everything lined up, timing, motive, access. Can you testify to this? Elena asked gently. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. If it fixes what they did, yes. That moment changed the entire momentum of the case. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet shift, like a door clicking open. The HOA responded exactly as expected, with fear disguised as authority. A new letter appeared on my truck windshield that night. Cease all legal interference. Further action may result in community-wide litigation. I crumpled it and dropped it into the trash. Their tone wasn't threatening anymore. It was rattled. 2 days later, we filed the lawsuit. Quiet title action, Michael Trent vs. Willow Creek Mountain Estates HOA. Filed under CRS 38-41-201. When I handed the clerk the documents, something settled inside me. A shift from defense to offense. From being cornered to standing on solid ground again. Elena looked at me as we stepped outside. This is where things change. I nodded. For them or for me? For both, she said. We walked down the courthouse steps. The sky was clear. The wind carried the scent of pine. The valley waited behind the ridge, unaware, or maybe fully aware, of what was coming. I wasn't done. Not close. But for the first time since returning, I wasn't alone. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was preparation. And the preparation was over. Courtrooms look bigger when you're the one they're waiting for. Not physically, just in weight. The ceiling felt higher, the light sharper, and every sound carried further than it needed to. When Elena and I walked in, the room was already half full. HOA members occupied the entire left side, whispering in tight clusters like they were preparing for a coordinated performance. I recognized a few faces. People who left warnings on my truck. People who watched me from their porches as if I were a stranger trespassing on my own history. At the front table sat Caroline and Daniel Huxley. She wore a polished expression, chin high. He flipped through a binder thick enough to look convincing. Neither of them looked my way. Elena placed our binder, much thinner, on the table. She glanced at me once. Ready? She asked. Absolutely. Judge Patricia Ellsworth entered without ceremony. Her presence wasn't loud, but it settled over the room with the precision of someone who had ruled on enough disputes to recognize when something deeper sat beneath the surface. She took her seat. This is case number 22 CV 318, Trent vs. Willow Creek Mountain Estates HOA. Counsel, opening statements. Daniel stood first. His voice carried a smooth confidence, practiced over years of real estate negotiations. Your Honor, the defendant HOA maintains rightful authority over the valley in question. The plaintiff is misinformed. The plat filed in 2019 clearly established community property boundaries, approved by membership vote and recorded with the county. This lawsuit seeks to disrupt the stability of an established community. He gave a slow, calculated glance toward the residence. Our position is simple: the plaintiff's claims lack legal basis and threaten homeowners who acted in good faith. He sat down with a faint smirk. Elena rose. No theatrics. No raised voice. Your Honor, the plaintiff doesn't seek disruption. He seeks truth. And the truth is measurable. The 2019 plat was recorded using a deceased notary's seal, forged signatures, and procedures in direct violation of Colorado Revised Statute 38-35-101. The defense claims legitimacy, yet every key document collapses under scrutiny. She set one page on the table. Today isn't about community stability. It's about correcting a fraud that redefined an entire valley without legal authority. When she sat, the judge nodded slowly, as if absorbing more than just words. The first witness was Harold Jensen. Caroline stiffened when his name was called. She hadn't expected him. Harold walked to the stand with deliberate steps. He was retired, but his presence remained solid. Elena approached him. Mr. Jensen, you were a licensed land surveyor until 2014, correct? Yes. She held up the 2019 plat. Is this your signature? Harold didn't hesitate. No. Someone copied my name. Poorly. And were you an active surveyor in 2019? No. I was home recovering from surgery. Elena nodded. So you could not have signed a plat recorded in that year? Correct. Daniel rose. Mr. Jensen, isn't it possible you signed something years ago that was later applied? Harold cut him off with a steady look. My signature isn't a sticker. I didn't sign this. And the notary stamp is from a woman I knew personally. She passed long before this. The courtroom fell silent. Next came the county clerk's junior staff member. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice stayed steady. Elena guided her gently. Please explain the after-hours recording process. The clerk swallowed. The only people allowed to record after hours are the county clerk, the deputy clerk, and attorneys with special clearance. And was the 2019 plat recorded during normal hours? No. Who submitted it? She glanced at the defense table. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. The login code belongs to Attorney Huxley. A whisper passed through the gallery like a wind gust. Caroline's face drained of color. Daniel stood abruptly. Objection. This is an internal matter. The judge held up a hand. Overruled. Continue. The clerk continued quietly. The document was scanned at 7:43 p.m. The building was locked at that time. Elena nodded. Thank you. Daniel called Caroline to the stand. Her confidence from earlier had thinned, but she tried to keep composure. Mrs. Huxley, Daniel began, did the HOA act legally when approving the 2019 plat? Of course, she said. We followed procedures. Did Mr. Trent ever raise concerns prior to filing this lawsuit? No. He never approached us constructively. He just appeared and started making accusations. Elena stood. Mrs. Huxley, did you write this email? She placed a printed copy on the evidence screen. We cannot allow the previous boundary claims to be resurrected. If Trent pushes further, escalate enforcement. Caroline blinked rapidly. That was taken out of context. What context? Elena asked. That he was threatening the community. Did he threaten anyone? His presence was disruptive. Elena's expression stayed neutral. So no verbal threats? No, Caroline admitted. And no written threats? No. So what exactly required escalated enforcement? Caroline's lips parted, but no answer came. For the first time, she looked small, like the valley she claimed had finally turned around to face her. The final piece of evidence was mine. Elena walked me through each question carefully, allowing the facts to land without dramatizing them. Mr. Trent, what is your profession? I'm a licensed land surveyor. And your father? Same profession. He documented the valley in 1986. Did your father ever sell or gift any portion of this land to Willow Creek Mountain Estates? No. Did you ever sign a membership agreement with the HOA? No. I could feel the room watching me, not as an intruder, but as someone telling a long-hidden truth. Mr. Trent, Elena asked, why pursue this case? I looked toward the judge. Because land doesn't lie. People do. And someone rewrote the valley on paper hoping no one would check. Daniel objected to the phrasing, but the judge allowed it. When I stepped down, the weight of the past months settled in my chest, not heavy, but certain. Elena delivered her closing with the same clarity she'd shown from the beginning. They built their homes on a foundation of forged filings, she said. Documents filed after hours. Signatures copied. A notary deceased before her seal was used. The law exists to protect property rights, not twist them. Under CRS 38-41-201, the plaintiff seeks recognition of the original, lawful ownership. Nothing more. Nothing less. Daniel's closing tried to pivot toward community impact, but it sounded thin, like a stage play unraveling mid-performance. When the judge finally spoke, the entire room leaned forward. I have reviewed the evidence, Judge Ellsworth began. The 2019 plat is invalid. The signatures were not authentic. The notary seal was fraudulent. The recording violated CRS 38-35-101. The plaintiff's deed from 1986 stands. Caroline trembled. Daniel closed his binder slowly, defeated. The judge continued. Quiet title is granted to Mr. Trent. The HOA holds no claim to his land. Any structures built within those boundaries will require negotiation with the lawful owner. A stunned hush filled the room. Then Judge Ellsworth added one final line, quiet but unmistakable. Mr. Trent, the valley is yours. The gavel fell. And for the first time since returning to Willow Creek Valley, I felt something close to peace. Not victory, truth. I returned to the valley the morning after the verdict. The air had that crisp stillness Colorado gets right before sunrise, when the sky is purple and the ground holds the night's cold like a final breath. I parked just before the old access road and stepped out. No gate blocked the path. No guard tower hummed. The booth stood empty, the door hanging crooked after the county removed their unauthorized setup. For the first time since coming back, the valley felt like itself. Pine needles cracked under my boots as I walked. Frost stretched across the grass in thin white threads. The creek murmured softly beside the road, drifting around smooth stones the way it had when my father first brought me here as a kid. I reached the overlook where the valley opened wide. The homes built illegally still stood, but they looked smaller now. Not in size, in presence. Maybe truth does that. It makes things appear exactly as they are, stripped of the illusion that once made them seem untouchable. A truck approached slowly from one of the driveways. A middle-aged man, one I'd seen at the hearing, stepped out. His shoulders carried a tired apology. He approached with cautious steps. Mr. Trent? I nodded. Morning. He exhaled like he'd been holding something in for months. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. We were told things that weren't true. You trusted the wrong people, I said gently. That happens. He looked around the valley. What happens now? We negotiate, not force anything, I answered. This place needs stability, not another fight. He offered a small smile. Thank you. When he drove off, I didn't feel anger. Just relief. The hostility of the past months had cracked, letting something calmer through. People weren't the enemy, misinformation was. And now the truth was too plain to ignore. Later that week, the county announced a formal investigation into the HOA's former leadership. Caroline resigned before they could remove her. Daniel quietly shut down his private practice. Residents held an emergency meeting and voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The authority they clung to evaporated in a single afternoon. but the part that stayed with me wasn't their downfall. It was what came afterward. A group of residents knocked on my cabin door one evening. Families, young couples, a retired teacher who'd lived here since the early planning stages. They brought coffee, homemade bread, even a stack of old photographs of the valley before construction began. One of them, a woman named Lisa, handed me a picture of the creek winding through a field thick with wildflowers. This was taken the year before they started the subdivision, she said. I thought you might want it. I held the photo carefully. My father had often talked about preserving the valley's natural shape. Seeing it in print stirred something deep. Thank you, I said quietly. We want to help fix things, she added. Whatever that looks like. That surprised me. Not because people were offering assistance, but because it was offered without expectation. They wanted transparency, fairness, and a valley that made sense again. I nodded. Then we start with honesty. No secret meetings. No hidden agendas. A man behind her said, sounds better than anything we've had in years. For the first time, the valley didn't feel divided. It felt like it was healing. A few weeks later, I walked toward the ridge where my father placed his original marker. The sun had just begun sliding behind the mountain range, casting the valley in a long golden glow. Shadows stretched across the ground in soft lines. The marker wasn't easy to find. My father carved it into a cedar stump decades ago, nothing ornate, just his initials, the date, and a small compass rose cut with a steady hand. I searched for almost an hour. The air smelled of sap and cold soil. Eventually, I found a familiar shape half hidden beneath fallen branches. The cedar stump remained, though time had weathered its surface. The carving was faint but still there. J.T. 1986. I brushed away the dirt with my sleeve. The lines were uneven now, softened by years of snow and sun. But I recognized them instantly. My father never chased perfection, he chased accuracy. He wanted the land recorded truthfully, even if the markings weren't flawless. I placed my hand on the stump. Though it felt cool, almost damp. A breeze swept down the slope, carrying the sound of the creek and the distant echo of birds winding down for the evening. I spoke softly, not to anyone nearby but to the memory of the man who taught me that boundaries meant something deeper than measurements. I kept it, I murmured. I didn't let them rewrite it. The valley felt quiet in a way that didn't echo conflict anymore. It echoed closure. Elena visited a few days later to finalize a handful of settlement agreements. We stood outside the cabin, looking down at the clusters of houses. You did more than win a case, she said. You corrected a narrative. I shrugged lightly. Truth does the heavy lifting. I just followed it. She smiled. Not everyone would have. I looked out across the land. I didn't have a choice. Some things you either defend or lose forever. Are you keeping all the land? She asked. I'm keeping what matters, I answered. But I'll work with the residents. They didn't cause this. That's generous, she said. It's necessary. She closed her folder. Well, if you ever need representation again, I know who to call. She laughed softly and headed to her car. On the valley floor, volunteers had begun cleaning debris left from years of rushed construction. The old trails were being reopened. Survey stakes were finally placed where they belonged. Some residents chose to buy back their lots legally, others prepared to relocate. But every decision was made through direct conversation, not pressure. One evening, a child on a bike waved at me as he passed. His parents followed behind, offering a quick greeting. It struck me then how different the valley felt. Not tense. Not divided. Just honest. Later, as I walked the path back to my cabin, I recorded the final segment for the documentary I had been quietly filming since the first day I returned. The camera sat on a tripod near the porch. I hit record and let the silence settle before speaking. When I came back, I thought I'd find what was left of my father's land. Instead, I found how easily truth can be buried under stamps and signatures. But paper has a way of revealing the people behind it. I paused, letting the wind brush against the microphone. This valley didn't need revenge. It needed clarity. I looked straight into the lens. Have you ever faced a corrupt HOA? Tell me your story in the comments, and remember. I let the final line land naturally, the way it had formed in my mind since this began. Paper doesn't lie. People do. Keep your receipts. I clicked off the camera. The valley was quiet. And this time, the quiet felt earned. I didn't expect the valley to change after the verdict. Not quickly, anyway. Land shifts slowly. Communities shift even slower. But in the months that followed, something subtle began to take shape: quiet adjustments, small repairs, conversations once avoided now happening openly. The first sign came on a cold February morning. A knock at my cabin door, soft, almost hesitant. When I answered, an elderly woman stood on the porch, bundled in a wool coat and holding a tin of something warm. "You must be Michael," she said. "I'm Ruth. I live in the third house off the trail." I nodded. "Hi, Ruth." She handed me the tin. Cinnamon biscuits. The old ones from the lodge recipe. "Thought you might want some." I took them, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." She didn't leave. Instead, she looked past me into the cabin, her expression a mix of nostalgia and regret. "My husband and I moved here because the valley reminded us of when Colorado was still wild," she said. "We didn't know what the HOA was doing. We just wanted a quiet place." "I know," I told her. "None of this was your fault." Her eyes softened. "I'm glad the truth came out. For your father. For you." That was the moment I realized the valley wasn't just mine to defend. It was a place people had built their lives around, some misled, some manipulated, but many simply trying to find home. That mattered. By spring, the county finalized its investigation. Caroline and Daniel were facing possible charges, though neither had been arrested yet. They had vanished from the valley entirely, no forwarding address, no goodbye, nothing. Their property remained vacant, the yard unkempt, the blinds drawn. One afternoon, while reviewing maps on my porch, a deputy sheriff drove up the hill. He stepped out, tipping his hat. "Mr. Trent," he said. "Mind if I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "We're closing out some paperwork. Anything else you want on record before this investigation moves forward?" I shook my head. "Everything that needed to be said is already documented." He smirked. "Figured you'd say that." Before leaving, he paused. "You know, most people don't push back when they're buried under paperwork. You did." "I didn't fight them," I said quietly. "I followed the trail." The deputy nodded once and drove off. The valley's restoration began almost naturally. Residents started taking down the unnecessary metal signs the HOA installed. The ones that told people where they couldn't walk, where they couldn't park, where they couldn't breathe without being fined. They stacked them near the old gate, letting time decide what should become of them. Children played along the creek again. People hiked the ridge without permission slips. Neighbors spoke to each other without fear of being reported. One evening, while walking a newly cleared trail, I met a couple repairing a broken fence. They waved me over. "You mind checking our property line?" the husband asked. "We want it done right this time." I pulled out my field notebook. "Sure. Where's your original stake?" He pointed to a patch of tall grass. "Somewhere in there." I found it half buried and marked it properly. When we finished, the wife looked at me with an expression that seemed to carry months of relief. "It feels lighter here," she said. "Like the valley can breathe again." I understood the feeling. Elena visited in late April. She wasn't here for legal work, just to see how things looked now that the dust had settled. We walked along the ridge, the sun dipping behind the peaks. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Different," I said. "Not because the fight ended. Because the valley feels honest again." She smiled. You handled all of this better than most people would have. I had help. Still, she said. You carried the weight. I looked out over the land. It never felt like weight. More like responsibility. That's still weight, she replied softly. We stood quietly, letting the wind fill the silence. By summer, the cabin repairs were complete. I replaced the old window frames, fixed the sagging porch, and restored the drafting table my father left behind. I set up my equipment on the same spot he used, where the morning light hit the wood just right. One afternoon I found an old survey book tucked behind the fireplace stones. My father's handwriting filled every page, field notes, elevations, sketches, even small comments about the wildlife he saw during his workdays. At the bottom of one page, he wrote, "Boundaries are not limits. They're stories waiting to be understood." I closed the book and sat there for a long moment, letting those words sink deeper than the ink they were written in. As restoration continued, the residents proposed something unexpected, a community council without legal authority, just neighbors coordinating land care, trail maintenance, and communication. They asked me to help. Not lead. Not oversee. Just help. At the first meeting, held outside under the shade of a large pine, people sat in a circle, equal, unguarded. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else brought maps. It was simple, but it was real. "What do you think we should do first?" a father of two asked. I looked around at the group, people who once whispered behind closed doors, now speaking openly. "Start with transparency," I said. "Every decision, every concern, every plan, put it in writing where everyone can see it." A few nodded. "And don't ever hand your trust to one person again," I added. "Make decisions together, not under pressure." Lisa, the woman who gave me the photo months earlier, smiled. "That sounds like a good rule to build on." It wasn't policy. It wasn't law. But it was a start. By early fall, the valley looked different. Not physically, though trails were clearer, and neglected areas had been restored, but emotionally. People laughed more. They stopped bracing for fines or letters. They talked to each other without caution. And as strange as it sounds, the land looked healthier. The creek ran clearer. The trees felt fuller. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was the first time in years the valley wasn't shadowed by conflict. One evening, I walked the ridge alone. The sky burned orange. The wind carried the scent of resin and earth. Below me, lights from the homes glowed softly, not like intrusions, but like signs of life settling into something genuine. I stopped beside my father's old marker again. Ran my hand along the cedar. Let the silence stretch. "You'd like it now," I murmured. "It finally feels like a place worth staying." A hawk circled overhead, drifting on the wind. The valley was quiet, but not empty. It held stories, old ones, new ones, ones still forming. I turned to head back down the trail, but paused to record one last message for the documentary. The camera captured the fading light behind me as I spoke. This didn't end with a verdict. It ended with restoration, of land, of truth, of the people who call this valley home. I looked straight into the lens. When someone rewrites your story, you don't need to shout. You just need to bring the truth back where it belongs. A small smile formed, unforced. And if you ever find yourself standing in the middle of a fight you didn't start, remember this. Paper doesn't lie. People do. So keep your receipts. I clicked off the camera. The valley exhaled. And for the first time, I felt like it was breathing with me.